Good afternoon and welcome to this Canmore Local Assessment Review Board hearing. I'd like to remind everyone that the Assessment Review Board hearings are open to the public and that this hearing is going to be live streamed today and recorded. The video recording will be our record of the hearing itself. We're here today to review the complaint and subsequent evidence as filed for tax roll 18750 for the property located at 217150 Crossbow Place, which is described as lot 313, block nothing, plan 010413090. I'm going to start by introducing the panel and then asking the parties to introduce themselves. After that, I will explain our standard hearing procedures and ask for any comments in that regard. My name is Michelle Ouellette, and I am the chair today appointed for the panel. The other panel members with me are Martin Buckley and Bill Foden. If you would please introduce yourselves. Bill?
I'm Bill Foden.
I'm Martin Buckley.
Thank you. Does anyone have any objections to the panel as constituted today? Does anyone here have any concerns with the panel today? Thank you.
None from the respondent.
I'm starting with the complainant. I'd like to have you introduce yourself, and then we'll introduce the respondent after that. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, please.
Oh, sorry, we'll just have to get you to stand up for the microphone. Sorry.
I'm Ron Suddy, I'm the complainant.
Thank you. Now to the respondent, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yes, Madam Chair. Lance Wayloggy with Benchmark Assessment Consultants. I'll be the respondent here today on behalf of the town of Canmore.
Thank you. You can sit down too. Thanks. So just for everyone's awareness, today the standard practice for the Local Assessment Review Board is to have the complainant present all of their evidence first, followed by the questions from the respondent and then the panel. Next, the respondent would present their evidence, followed once again by questions from the complainant and then the panel. The complainant will then have an opportunity for rebuttal. Finally, both parties will have an opportunity to present their final argument and summarize their evidence for the panel, with the complainant presenting first. If for some reason anyone requires a break during this process, please let us know as soon as possible and we can address things as we go. I'm also going to take this time to remind everybody to just turn off cell phones or any mobile devices you might have. Does anyone have any questions about the process I've outlined?
Yeah, I just want to know in terms of procedure, when it says I submit my evidence, do I have to follow my document or can I present my evidence?
You may present your evidence however you'd like to today.
Thanks.
And we have your written information that we'll walk through with the clerk shortly.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other preliminary issues for the panel to address today?
None from the respondent, Madam Chair.
And we reviewed things prior to this hearing, and the panel does not have anything to identify. Both parties have exchanged the disclosure evidence prior to the hearing. And so just to make sure that we're clear on the documents as provided to the clerk and to ourselves, Madam Clerk, would you mind reading out the evidence as provided?
All right, so we have complainant disclosure. It's the complaint form package, which is 3 pages, and that has been identified as C1. There's a 3-page package 2022 RE Assessment Appeal Disclosure Summary, and that will be C2. 3 pages. 2022 Assessment Appeal Disclosure, that's 2 pages, and that will be C3. Corrected Data, 1 page, and that will be Complainant Disclosure C4. Original Assessor Data, 1 page, and that is Complainant Disclosure C5. We have the Respondent Disclosure Submission, which is 57 pages, and that is Respondent Disclosure R1. And for rebuttal evidence from the complainant, we have rebuttal evidence, 4 pages, identified as C6. Rebuttal evidence email exchange, 12 pages, identified as C7.
Thank you very much. So now, Mr. Sutty, we are ready to hear from you and have you present your evidence if you're ready to go ahead.
Okay, thanks for having me. Just want to start off by saying I don't mind paying taxes. I worked for the Canada Revenue Agency for 32 and a half years, and if you don't like taxes, you can't do that job. I also want to point out that in 44 years of home ownership, this is the first time I've ever filed a complaint to my property taxes. Just in brief, before I go into a lot of detail, I have an annual procedure where I just go to the town's website, and in a condo complex situation, it's a lot simpler. You know the units that are identical to yours, so you go into the system, you plug in the addresses, and this was the first year that I found a discrepancy between my units in my building and units in the other building. There's 2 buildings in Crossbow Place, 150 and 170. The difference isn't large, but I don't want to pay more than my neighbor who's got the identical unit to me. I'm not disputing the use of the mass appraisal system. Obviously, you have to have some sort of model that you can assess a large amount of properties in a limited period of time, so that's not the issue here. I'm not disputing the issue that the onus is on me to disprove the assessment. Obviously, once the respondent has the results and has tested them appropriately, they can't be expected to drill down into every single property to see if there's some sort of discrepancy. That's my job. And today I'm here a year after my original assessment, and I put a lot of time into this, and I don't think I'd ever do it again, because I think I'm down to, even if I'm fully successful, I think I'm down to like $2 or $3 an hour. So it's not really worth it, but I'm also really concerned about the process and the fact that I did a lot of work on this and provided a lot of arguments, and the common theme from the respondent was, I follow the legislation, I follow the framework of the legislation, and you've made some points, I'll take those into account next year. And that just doesn't sit well with me. So today's task should have been a little bit simpler, because all I was asking in the second complaint was, am I entitled to a further adjustment than what given in the first complaint? But now the respondent has come back with what I view as basically a template that could have been used for any complaint, and has not addressed any of my specific concerns, and now they want to go back to the original amount as if nothing has transpired since last February, and that I haven't met any onus. So the first thing I want to address is not meeting the onus. So I want to go to package C6, page 3. That's an email from the respondent dated Friday, September 2nd, 2022. Everybody got that now? Yeah. So this is after I had filed my disclosure and complaint number 1. Thank you for providing your disclosure documents. I've had a chance to review them and feel that the likelihood of your success at the Assessment Review Board is strong. I'm prepared to revise the assessment of your property. So to me, how can she make that statement if I haven't met the onus? So I've provided a lot of information back in February and March and April, and there was basically no new information in the disclosure. So she's reviewed that information, and now she says she can revise the assessment of a property. So I think there's a pretty good assumption there that I definitely had met the onus, because how can she make that statement if I hadn't met the onus? And then secondly, on 6 days later, there's another email. It says September 9th at the top in my heading, but it was actually September 8th. Then she says, to be clear, the most compelling item that you had, which was the reason I revised your assessment, was the purchase price of your property, which was 12% below your assessed value. So I admittedly did get a bit of a bargain on the property. And now she's saying that that's the most compelling reason. Compelling is a pretty strong word. That's the most compelling reason to allow my assessment. Now, you might wonder why the two separate emails. So after the first email, I'm going to get allowance in full. I should be happy, right? Well, I'm not happy because all my arguments were made back in February and March. There were no new arguments after that. So why wasn't this resolved in February and March? So I'm not happy about that. The other thing I'm not happy about that, if my position was correct, there's probably 30 units in my building that probably deserve the same adjustment. So I'm not happy about that either, because had I known in February and March, I can alert my other neighbors and they can get involved as well. So I approached the assessor and I pointed out these facts. And she said, no, you've signed your, and that's when she sent the second email about, well, that wasn't, all your reasons really weren't the reasons I allowed it, even though, interestingly, I never brought up the low purchase price in my disclosure. I never made that argument. The only reference by me to my low purchase price, and we'll get into that a little bit later, is it was not included in the original data. That was my only reference to it. I never argued that that's what my assessment should be based on. So when I get the second email, I look at this and I say, well, I guess if that's the compelling reason, then I deserve a further adjustment down to $517,000. So that's the basis of my second complaint. So I asked the assessor, because subsection 305(1) of the Municipal Government Act says if she discovers an error, she can go ahead and make the adjustment. You don't even need a complaint. So I asked her that. She wasn't prepared to do that. So here we are with the second complaint. So I think I just acknowledged that I met the onus. So I don't know why we're talking about onus now. But since the respondent wants to go back to day one, then I think that's what we'll have to do, and I'll have to start at the beginning, and I'll go through everything I presented to the assessor, and we'll see what you think. So the second thing I want to look at is okay, I think okay. Just sorry about this. Okay, if you go to the package of the emails that I sent, so that's a package C7 and the email evidence, page 12 of 12. So I submitted the whole chain of emails to Ms. Dalrymple, so it's sort of going to go backwards. So I made my first contact on February 15th, and this is after going to the town website and looking at the assessments of various properties in my complex to compare, am I being assessed the same as my other identical units? And so I noticed that in that email, there's 8 units that are the same, identical, not similar, identical. 217, 150, 105, 150, 205, 150, 104, 170, 204, 170, and there should have been 2 more 170s there, but it doesn't matter. So that the last year, so this is what I'm saying. Last year, all those units were assessed at $548,000. This year, the 150 units are assessed at $578,000, and the 170 units are down to $539,000. So I'm wondering, these units are identical. Why is this different? And one thing I will give the respondent credit for, whenever I contacted her, she was very quick in her responses, so the things did keep flowing that way. So I asked for the data, and that was used to make these determinations. So the data is so the original data is in package C5, and it's just by itself, original data, page 1 of 1. So two things to notice there. My unit, 217-150, is not on that list. And the other thing to notice, I bolded some dates under sale date. Those dates are after the July 1st cutoff date. So I pointed this, that's one of the things I pointed out with the assessor, that my unit has not been included in the data, and there's units that are past the cutoff date. Would this make any difference? And then when we go to the corrected data, so now she's included my sale, and she's also taken out the those bolded units that weren't, shouldn't have been in there. But there's no recalculation here, and whether that would have made much of a difference, I'm not sure. And again, I want to emphasize, I just wanted that number included, my unit included in the data. I never said, please reduce my assessment to $517,000. So let's go to back to that email package, page 10 of 12 of C7. So I pointed out a few things to the assessor that now we're getting into the a few other things like square footage and stuff like that, and my purchase of the property within the 3-year period for $490,000. So I looked at if we go back to the corrected data again. I looked at two different square footages. I looked at 947 square feet, and I was just curious about that because I used to live in a 947 square foot unit in that building. And if in the corrected data, if you look at the average assessment, the average sale price for 150 is $468,000. The average sale price of those units for 170 is roughly the same amount, $468,000. The assessment amounts are almost the same. If you look at the 1,389 to 1,410 square foot units, in 150, the average sales value, 565, average assessment, 587, and for 170, average sales value 568, and assessment 540. So there's something off here as far as I'm concerned. Now, what the assessor had explained to me is, and this is in her email dated February 16, 2022. It starts on page 11, ends on page 12. She said they're valued separately from each other because she had enough sales in each building to justify showing them as a separate group. So that's where I start scratching my head again, because you have two buildings in the same complex, and if you've ever been there, they look the same from the outside, all the common areas are the same floor plans are available in each unit or in each building, same condo board, same condo corporation, share the same amenities building. To me, there was no reason to put them in a separate group. And in fact, in all the years previous and this year, I just got my assessment for this year, it's back to one group. But all I was told is, I'll take that into account next year. I'll take that into account next year. That was the common theme. So if we go to the email, page 5 of 12 of the rebuttal C7. So this is where, it's pretty clear to me I'm going to have to file a complaint, but in in the openness, transparency, I want to summarize and give everything that I've presented so far and see if I can somehow have a breakthrough here. So I started with both buildings, same geographic location, built by the same developer, same floor plan, same amenities, same property manager, same condominium board. I said they should not be valued separately. At one point, the assessor said they could be. I'm saying they should not be valued separately. And she admitted that they could be valued together, but not should be. I say they should be valued together. So in the corrected data, I analyzed, well, why did this come out so different? So I'm not privy to the algorithm that is used to actually come out with the numbers, but based on the little bit I've showed you so far, and say, well, why would this come out different? So I did some more analysis, and this is where my background as a professional accountant came in handy. I'm good at analyzing numbers. And there's one sale in there that was 600 and, I forget what it was, but the adjusted sales value was 717,000. That was the only one. That's the biggest unit in 150. I think there's only one of those in each building. There was no other adjusted sales value over 600,000. So that skews the result. And the other thing I found out was that 60%, 9 out of the 15 sales for 150 were for units larger than 1,389 square feet. Obviously, they're going to sell for more. For 170, 5 out of the 17 units, only 29%, were for larger units. So like I said, I don't know for sure. I don't know how the algorithm works, but I would say that the results came out the way they did because of that disproportion and because of this skewed sale. And so I made the point again to the assessor in my conclusion on page 6 of 12. One questionable decision, valuing the two buildings separately, ends up with a result that is not fair and equitable. And I know they applied their statistical testing and all that, but the bottom line is the Act still says it has to be fair and equitable, and having an identical unit in another building in the same complex assessed lower than the other building is just not fair and equitable. So I made all these points, and still, I'm not getting anywhere. Let's go to, she goes back on page 412. We're back into the legislation again, and then at the bottom of the page, the March 23rd email, written in response to your concerns, I will test combining the properties for valuation purposes for next year. Well, I've done all this work, and all I'm going to get is that I'll test it next year. Just very disappointing. And then in the last paragraph, I cannot reduce your property assessment. So the next step is to file the formal complaint. So I did file the formal complaint, and I was encouraged by the town to try to continue to dialogue with the assessor, which I did to some extent, but it was clear that nothing was going to happen. So then I filed my disclosure on August 23rd. It was due on August 29th. I didn't wait till 4 o'clock on the last day, or last possible day, to file my disclosure. I made all the points that I had made previously. These are not new arguments. I made all the points I made back in March and February. So I think the respondent, I'm speculating here, but they might say, well, you made an agreement and now you've broken it, and that's why you can go back to the beginning. And I'm fully aware, I know the law, I'm fully aware that you have the power to put it back to where it was. You can reduce it, you can leave it the same, you can put it back to where it was. And I'm fully aware of that, but I think I've showed you that the respondent agreed that I had a good case in the first place, one way or another. Either all my arguments and analysis was correct, as indicated in their first email, or the lower price of my property is a compelling reason to allow my complaint, one way or the other. So then I ended up with the second complaint, and so that's package C2. And just to briefly go through there, all my facts and arguments were made way back in February, March of 2022. The original disclosure, it was a contention that 2 buildings should be assessed as one group. Deeper analysis of the data clearly demonstrated that units of the same size were actually selling higher in 170. There were errors in the data. I request that the 2022 assessment was reduced, specifically to $539,000, which was the number I wanted. So they were going to say I agreed to this. Well, why wouldn't I agree? It's what I wanted, $539,000. So it's not like we settled it somewhere in between. Let's just agree to $560,000 for settlement purposes, and no one's right, no one's wrong. Let's just agree to $560,000. No, they agreed to my number, and now they're saying it was for a different reason. So I'm saying, well, fine, let's make it lower then. Yeah, so point 9, again, on page 2 of 3, I want to emphasize, she said there was a compelling item. So again, compelling is a pretty strong word, so I think a lot of weight should be put on that. So I think it should be reduced to $517,000. And when I was signed that withdrawal, it was on the assumption that of the evidence presented in my disclosure documents. And I'm not breaking the agreement because I signed it on that assumption. This compelling reason, the low purchase price, that's new information to me because, like I said, I never argued that. So I'm going to take advantage of that new information and make the further argument that I should be reduced to $517,000. And then just briefly to go through my rebuttal to the respondent's disclosure. Like I said, I get it. This is another strange thing with the system. So they're supposed to have, there's supposed to be 7 clear days between the hearing date and their disclosure date. But of course, because of a weekend and a statutory holiday, they get 2 extra days, and now we're down to 5 days. And normally, you would have 7 clear days. I have 3 clear days. I would have 4 days to rebut. In this case, I get 2 days. So again, another little flaw in the system. But I put it together anyway. So they throw this disclosure at me, a lot of quotes, a lot of references to the law and some former tribunal decisions. No specific, addressing any of my concerns all along the way. And again, saying I had not met the onus when clearly the 2 emails in September show that I clearly had met the onus in their opinion. And so they haven't addressed the compelling reason for was the lower arm's length purchase value. That's what they told me. And so to me, the respondent has indicated that I have met the onus, and they've already agreed to reduce the original assessment because I had a strong case, later because of the compelling reason. So certainly, it shouldn't be returned to the original amount. And the respondent also has to be asked that when all these facts and arguments were led through their statements in 3 and 5 above, were available to them in February, March of 2022, why it took to September 2022 to agree to reduce the original assessment. And finally, if you decide that a further reduction to the 539 is not warranted, the second complaint is precipitated on the respondent's statement, and had the respondent told me that prior to my signing this withdrawal, I would have likely said, well, wait a minute, then I should get 517. It would have gone before I wouldn't have withdrawn. It would have gone before the tribunal in September. And even if you didn't agree that it should be reduced to 517, I would have had partial success, and I still would have got my $50 back. So I'm basically saying today, this second complaint is a direct result of the respondent And whether you adjust that any further or not, I'd still like to respectfully request my $50 back. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we will hear from the respondent and see if there's any questions about the presentation we've just heard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Suddy, for your presentation. I just have one or two questions for you, Mr. Suddy, through the board, of course. You mentioned that the purchase of the subject property was friend to friend, like you were friends with the previous owner, and it was a private sale, so it wasn't publicly listed, and you got a bit of a deal, you feel. Did I accurately paraphrase what I heard in the hearing? Is that correct?
You'll have to go to the mic to answer. Thank you.
Yeah, just to address that specifically, my next door neighbor, it's exactly next door, approached me with a number, which was very good to me. But there's all kinds of factors involved when you agree to a number. For the benefit for me, or the benefit for her, was that she didn't have to go through real estate. The benefit for me was that I had a 6-month long closing date. So there's different factors involved there, and how much weight you could put on the different factors and how much they were really worth, I'm not sure. But the bottom line is was an arm's length party, and we had a negotiation, and that's the number we ended up with. And like I said, I emphasize again, I never initially used that as an argument. It was the respondent that told me later on, basically, you should have used that as an argument.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That's all the questions I have.
Thank you. Now I'm just going to ask Bill, do you have any questions of the complaint?
Yes, so I'm a little confused about the statement you made, Mr. Suddy, about the sale price of your unit being new information.
The sale price of which?
You mentioned that the sale price of your unit was new information.
Well, my purchase price?
Yeah.
Okay, so
your purchase price.
Yeah, so my purchase price was $490,000, and the adjusted sales price on the next year's data is $517,000. How much of a discount I got, if you want to use the word discount, I'm not sure, but it was. This is a part of it's not related to me, and it was arm's length. So what's your specific question?
Well, I'm trying to understand the relevance of that. Like, that information was available to both parties at the time of the original appeal, and
okay, so
it's
it wasn't
also
in the
available
original. Sorry.
For this appeal.
Yeah, so it wasn't in the original data.
Right.
It should be included in the original data,
Okay,
because it was within the 3-year period.
So the page with the corrected data on it, which is your disclosure C4, when was that produced?
What's that?
Do you know when that document was prepared, the corrected data document?
I have to go back to, if we went back into her emails, or the series of emails, we would find that somewhere. Everything moved, like I said, everything moved along fairly quickly. The response time from the respondent was always very quick. So when I pointed out, so on February 20th, I pointed out a few discrepancies. That's where I mentioned that this is not reflected in your data. If you look at page 10 of 12 of the emails, down at the bottom, under February 20th, it says number 2, this was not reflected in your data. And she responded the next day, stating that, acknowledging that and thanking me for the input. Now, when exactly she gave the next sheet, I'm not sure. But like I said, everything was moving along. That was the one bright spot in the whole affair, is that everything did move along fairly quickly. So.
Okay, thank you. So what I'm wondering is, was this corrected data sheet available at the time that you and the respondent signed the the agreement to the correction of the assessment value.
Oh, yeah, I mean, it would have been, if the original stuff is February 23rd, somewhere around there, it's got to be shortly after that.
Okay, thanks.
Do you have any questions, Martin?
Thank you, Madam Chair. No, not at this point in time. Mr. Suddy's presentation was good. It's raised some questions for the respondent for me.
Thank you. I don't have any questions. Now we're going to listen to the evidence as presented by the respondent, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. I'll just reintroduce myself. I don't believe I've had an opportunity to present in front of 2 out of the 3 members. So, of course, my memory could be a bit hazy. But my name is Lance Wayloggy. I'm an accredited municipal assessor of Alberta. I'm the appointed assessor for the town of Canmore. I'm one of several assessors that work within the town, and I'll be giving the presentation today and providing the disclosure for the respondent. Just a couple of housekeeping items before I get into the presentation. I tend to focus the board's attention to specific pages within the document, the most important pages, mostly surrounding the evidence and argument. So you'll notice that the document itself is 57 pages. I'm not going to go through all 57 pages. Rather, I'll direct the board to 1 or 2 specific pages in which I feel the most important, the most pertinent information is there for the board to make its decision here today. But before I want to get into the specifics of the presentation, Madam Chair, I do want to just provide a little bit more background. I'm sure the board has some questions arising from the complainant's disclosure. I want to provide a little bit of background with the specific situation. We have always felt that the original assessed value of $578,000 was the most fair and the most equitable value. Now we've held that for much of the customer review period, all the way into the exchange of disclosure prior to the first scheduled hearing. So the question that the complainant has, and I'm sure the board has, is, well, why resolve this complaint at $539,000 if you feel $578,000 was the most fair and equitable value? Now, certainly we could have went forward with the original hearing and made our evidence and presented our argument. But we've been through many boards and we've had many decisions in the past. And there's a couple things we felt that were pretty favorable for the complainant at that time. The first being that the ask was fairly reasonable. The complainant was requesting a reduction of $39,000 from $578,000. It's not like he came forward and said, I want half the assessment off. So the request from the complainant was fairly reasonable. That tends to show very favorable before a board. Ultimately, we have to look at how the board's going to interpret the evidence and the argument presented by the complainant. So as you were alluding to, Mr. Fulton, the subject sale was available to both parties, obviously, before the disclosures of the first hearing. We weren't going to hide from that fact. Certainly, if the board was to hear this complaint, we would let the board know, or the complainant would let the board know, that the subject property did sell for $490,000, adjusted for market conditions to the valuation date of July 1st, 2021, for $517,000. So we're not hiding from that fact. Ultimately, it would have come out in the original hearing. Typically, we find that if a subject property that's under complaint sells within, certainly within the last year, which the subject property had, transferring in July of 2020, we find the board places a great deal of weight on that sale price. So that's the second reason why. And thirdly is the complainant had and was able to demonstrate to the board by pointing out that there were the same sized units in the complex at 170 that were valued or assessed rather at $539,000. So we felt if it went before the board, because the ask was fairly reasonable at $39,000, because the subject sale price was substantially lower than the assessed value of $578,000, we felt the board would likely or could place a significant amount of weight on that subject sale. And because there was assessments in the next complex that were $539,000, highly similar. So for those three reasons, we thought, and we said to the complainant that certainly he has a strong case before the board for a reduction. We felt like there was an opportunity to resolve it at that value rather than going through the complaint hearing process. So we chose to, at that time, resolve the issue at $539. Again, we still think the original value of $578,000 is the most fair and the most equitable value. We're here before you today to ultimately make the evidence or submit the evidence and make the arguments for an assessment of $578,000, as we do believe that's the most fair and the most equitable value. I think the one thing that hasn't really been brought to attention of the board is that although we do believe the complainant has a strong case, we also believe we have a strong case for the assessment to be restored at $578,000. So I will get into the specifics of that very shortly, but just to give you an overview of our position is we feel that because the subject sale was not typical, in our opinion, it's a friend-to-friend transfer, it's a private sale, it's a sale where the complainant has indicated that there was a bit of a deal with respect to the overall purchase price. This is not a typical transaction. I would say in the marketplace, you typically don't have transactions which are private, friend to friend, and in the words of the complainant, a little bit of a deal with respect to the price. So this sale is not what we would consider typical. And as the board knows, we have to prepare legislatively. We have to prepare assessments that reflect typical market conditions for properties similar to the subject property as well as similar properties. So we are going to be leading evidence here today to essentially take a look at what the other units within the specific complex sold for to demonstrate to the board that a value of $578,000 is fair. We're going to be leading evidence within the subject's complex, that is 150 Crossbow Place. So not 170, but the subject's exact complex, where these units, the same units that sold, are all assessed at $578,000, which are the exact same size on the first and second floor, highly similar to the subject property. And at the end of the day, Madam Chair, members of the board, our request is that you have the ability to restore the assessment to what we believe is the most fair and equitable value for the subject property at $578,000. So with that, Madam Chair, I'm going to skip to page 11 of R1. I'll just give everybody a moment to get there. You'll see at the end of the page or the bottom portion of the page a table, and the table is we've seen this in the complainant's evidence, but these are the sales in 150 Crossbow Place as well as 170 Crossbow Place, and you'll notice that we have highlighted 3 rows in green, and those units addressed at 109 150 Crossbow Place, 113 150 Crossbow Place, and 202 150 Crossbow Place are the 3 sales that we would like to lead before the board as the strongest evidence for market value of this particular property or the subject's property. So you'll notice as you scan to the right, in the columns, you'll have roll number, address, the 2020 assessment, the unit area or the size of the complex or unit, the sale date, and the time-adjusted sale price. So these are the sale prices that are adjusted to July 1st, 2021 for market conditions. And if we take a look, first, Madam Chair, members of the board, the column sale price adjusted to July 1st, 2021. This is the second column from the right. And if we take a look at the first sale, 109-150 Crossbow Place, you'll see that this unit is the exact same size as the subject property. It's located on the first floor of the exact same complex. That's 150 Crossbow Place, not 170. And it's sold for an adjusted sale price of $593,600. 2 rows down, you'll see the second comparable sale, 113-150 Crossbow Place. Scanning to the right, you'll notice that it's sold for $568,700. And lastly, 2 rows down, 202-150 Crossbow Place. Again, same size as the subject property. On the second floor, same as the subject property, sold for $592,200. So if you take a look at those 3 sales, these are the best indicators of value, Madam Chair, and they range from $568,700 all the way up to $593,600. So the range certainly is closer to the high 500 range, 568 to 593. Certainly supporting an assessed value in the 578,000 range, which is on the lower end of the indicated sales range. And the last thing to note, Madam Chair, is these 3 sales are the best equity comparables as well. You'll notice again, they're in the same complex as the subject property, 150 Crossbow. They're located on the first and second floor, highly similar to the subject property, all sized at 1,410 square feet, same as the subject property. And you'll notice in the third column from the left, the 2022 assessments, 109-150 Crossbow Place is assessed at $578,000. 113-150 Crossbow Place assessed at $578,000. And lastly, 202-150 Crossbow Place assessed at $578,000. So the complainant has made his arguments with respect to fairness and equity today, saying he wants to be assessed fairly and equitably. Well, Madam Chair, members of the board, if we're looking just strictly on the best comparable sales indicators and the best comparable equity indicators, certainly an assessment of $578,000 would be the most fair and equitable assessment for this particular unit. Lastly, Madam Chair, members of the board, if I can get you to turn to page 27 of R1. I think everybody's there. What I want to draw the board's attention to is the bottom of the page under Part 1, Mass Appraisal, subsection 5. An assessment of property based on market value must be prepared using mass appraisal. It must be an estimate of the value of the fee simple estate in the property. And C, it must reflect typical market conditions for properties similar to that property. So again, when we're preparing assessments using mass appraisal as legislatively required, we have to reflect what's typical. And one of the arguments, again, I think the strongest part of the complainant's case is really the sale of the subject property at an adjusted amount of $517. But again, our position on that is that this does not reflect typical market conditions for that unit or other units. We've already discussed that it's a private sale, whereas the 3 sales that I've introduced to the board are all public sales. They were all on the multiple listing site, sold publicly. The subject sale, again, it's friend to friend, and the complainant indicated that he probably got a bit of a deal on it. So in our opinion, the typical sale in the Canmore market certainly isn't a private sale, friend to friend. This sale and the sale price associated to it, we feel does not reflect typical market conditions. And if you look at the 3 indicators that we've provided, we feel that these are strong indicators that reflect typical market conditions for those units, and obviously highly similar to the subject property. With that, Madam Chair, members of the board, our request again is that the board restore the original assessment of $578,000. And I'll open the floor to any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Seti, do you have any questions?
Okay, thanks for that. So the comparables you just went through, those are all for 150, correct? So that's based on 150 being treated as a separate group from 170.
Correct.
And so this was the only year that they treated as a separate group. All prior years that I have knowledge of since I moved there in 2017, they're one group. And in 2023, they're back to one group. I was given the explanation by the assessor that there was enough sales in 2020, or up for the 2022 assessment, to support two groups. And yet in 2023, when there's more sales, it's back to one group. Can you explain that for me?
Yeah, I think, in my opinion, I'm not going to say it's a moot point because I know it's important to you. However, with respect to valuation, I mean, the theory on it is if you have two complexes which are similar enough to be grouped together, as you have suggested, then doing them separately should produce similar results. So it's a bit of a moot point for me because ultimately, if they're done together or separately, they should produce similar results if they're similar.
Okay, so you wouldn't agree with me that treating them as a separate group in 2022 definitely produced some anomalies when you drill down and examine actual sales in both buildings?
Well, I think you had alluded to, and certainly, we recognize that the units at 170 were slightly underassessed, and I think largely if those assessments had been slightly higher, I don't think this would have produced the issues from your assessment. So, like I said, to us, it's kind of a moot point whether you do it separately or together. If the units are producing similar sales value for similar units, it should be, you could do it either way, ultimately. So I think we had an opportunity to combine them again, to try to address some of the concerns that you put forward. And like I said, either way is fine with us. We think it does produce similar results, barring maybe last year where 170 was slightly underassessed.
Well, respectfully, I would argue that it's not a moot point because you could see from the analysis of the corrected data that it did produce an anomaly. So I want to take you back to the September 2nd, Friday, September 2nd, 2022 email, where it was stated that I had a strong case and based on my disclosure documents. So I'm still troubled with if the compelling reason was the lower sales price of my property, why at that time didn't it say that? Why did the September 2nd email said based on my disclosure documents?
Well, I think from the assessment point of view, right, we wouldn't make an individual adjustment based on an individual sale, right? So I think I've explained the mass appraisal process. Essentially, you're using all the sales within a stratification to develop a valuation for all the units within that stratification. So certainly, everything leading up to the disclosure date, and even today, we hold that true. I think one of the things that had changed, as I said at the start of the presentation, when it goes to an assessment review board, and when you lead evidence as you did, from our point of view, we're looking at how the board's going to interpret that. We've been to the board. We've been to the board quite a few times over the last, well, it would be nearly 2 decades for myself and some of my other colleagues a little bit more. So we have some experience in what the board tends to place weight on at a hearing. And as I mentioned, the 3 things with respect to a reasonable ask, a sale price, even though we think it's not typical, and we would make that argument. Not all the time does the board side with the assessor in that case. So the board could have, and still may, place a significant amount of weighting on the actual sale price. And thirdly, they could place some weight on the equity comparables at 170. So although we hold that the most fair and equitable assessment, in our opinion, is 578, and we certainly led evidence that would support that, we could understand there could be a circumstance in which a board would have reduced it to 539 based on the evidence that you gave. So you had a strong case. We think we have a strong response. We're not dealing with, in my opinion, I'll leave it at that. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, so just finally, in the September 2nd email, it stated that in your professional opinion, or Deanne's professional opinion, the likelihood of success would be strong. In the September 8th email, I felt the board would find your purchase price a compelling reason, and again, in a professional opinion, and yet now today, you're thinking the board's going to go totally in the opposite direction. Thank you.
Well, again, yeah, we've held true that 578 we think is the most fair and most equitable value. I've led 3 sales within your exact complex that range from 568,000 to 593,000. I've led those 3 same sales for equity comparables, each assessed at 578,000. So I don't think the ask from the assessment side of it to have the board restore 578 is too unreasonable. I think it's a fair ask. And like I say, I think it's the most fair and equitable value.
Thank you very much. Mr. Foden, do you have any questions for the respondent?
No.
Mr. Buckley, do you have any questions for the respondent?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Wailagi, the comments that came from the assessor included the one that your purchase price a compelling reason to revise your assessment. But that doesn't necessarily mean the assessment is suddenly going to drop to the sale value of the property.
Exactly, 100%. And as I mentioned earlier, just because a sale is less than or greater than the assessment, the assessor is looking to prepare assessments using mass appraisals. So what that means is you're going to have half of the indicators above the valuation model, or half the indicators above the assessments and half of the indicators below the assessment. So we're trying to reflect a valuation model that's typical or reflects typical market conditions. So you're bang on. We're not going to reduce an assessment or increase an assessment just based on an individual sale price.
Okay, thank you. Second question, we've received a number of spreadsheets with data on them reflecting, I believe, sales of units in the 2 buildings. Complainant disclosure C4 and C5, for example. And then in the respondent's disclosure, pages 52 and 53. And I've also heard comments that the 2 buildings, 150 and 170, are exact duplicates of each other. I take it these charts are strictly the sales units, because I notice there's some very varying different numbers when it comes to the square footage of some of the units.
Yeah, you're right. These are all the sales within the 2 complexes.
So none of these documents list all of the units in the 2.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. And then one final question. The point that's been raised about why you haven't combined the 2 buildings for assessment purposes, and now you're saying the firm may very well decide to do that with the next assessment?
We did do that for the 2023 assessment. Yeah, we took the opportunity to maybe address a certain issue. If the 2 complexes show similar results, in theory, whether you create a valuation model separately or together, they should produce similar results. Now, that didn't happen in the 2022 tax year, And we attribute that to being maybe a little bit on the low side on 170 crossbow plays. We took the opportunity and we take the opportunity in any area to improve if we can. We felt it was probably an area we could collapse it because, again, in our opinion, whether we do it separately or whether we do it together, if they're showing similar results, it should produce similar results. We took the opportunity to combine them for the 2023 tax year, ultimately to address some of the concerns that came out of that.
Okay. And sorry, one final question. The agreement that was reached previously that both parties signed off on, is that a normal practice for assessors?
Yes, we try to resolve, if possible, as best we can prior to getting to the hearing. If we feel that we are going to be unsuccessful due to the information or the disclosure that the complainant puts forward, then we certainly don't want to waste the complainant's time, waste the board's time. For efficiency in the process, if we have a very low chance of success based on disclosure, then of course we try to resolve.
But does the resolution include a document signed by both the assessor and the would-be complainant?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
It does? Okay. Thank you. I just wanted to know if that was a norm or whether this is a one-off.
Yep.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yep.
Thank you, everyone. Next, I'd just like to ask if Mr. Suddy has any rebuttal evidence to present to the board coming out of those questions that we've just heard. Well, just if you know how you have your rebuttal evidence that you did bring up earlier in the hearing, you can go back and present any additional rebuttal evidence if you have. Okay, then we can certainly move on then to the argument summation. I'm going to ask you to stand up then, and we'll move to the summation of your application. That'd be fine.
Yeah, so I just want to say that the main cause of this is probably the decision to treat, just for that 1 year only, the two buildings as one group. That's because then when you apply the algorithm to that specific set of sales, it just comes out with a result that's not fair and equitable. That's what it comes down to. And so it shouldn't be penalized for that one decision in that 1 year when it's obvious that I can't assume there's an acknowledgement that that was the incorrect decision, but now we're back to one group again. So, and because even with that one decision, I mean, I think I showed clearly in my analysis of the numbers that it just ended up with a bad result. You can't have identical units in the same complex being treated differently when I said they were one group before, they're one group after. They should have been one group that year, but separating them ended up with a bad result. And just getting back to this agreement you were talking about, I'm not sure if it's legally required, but especially if there was a negotiated amount, I could see that the assessor would want to say to the town, here's an agreement signed by both of us to settle this. So I think it's just something to say this is done, we're going to move forward, go ahead and adjust the taxes. But in this case, in the first complaint, it was allowed in full. So there probably was legally no need for an agreement. I think the assessor could have just notified the town, please reduce the assessment to $539,000. So there's no real, weight that should put on the word agreement and that I potentially broke some agreement. It allowed my complaint in full. So I wasn't really agreeing with anything except that's great. Let's go ahead and move this forward. And if you need to sign a document to move this forward and have the town make the adjustment, fine. But there was really no, like I said, there was no negotiation. There's no for settlement purposes only, anything like that. So I think I've made my case, and I think I clearly showed that there was a bad result here. there has to be some sort of system to assess all these properties, but in this case, it ended up with a bad result, and I know it's not a lot of money, but for me, it was the principle of the thing, and again, a little frustrated by the fact that, I presented all this back in February and March, and I think it should have been resolved back then. And again, had it been resolved back then I believe that there's probably like 30 unit holders that should have had their taxes reduced. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Werlagi, do you have any final closing comments?
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. Thank you again to Mr. Suddy for your presentation. I think it's important from our point of view for the board to know that had we known that there would be, and we don't show any ill will towards Mr. Suddy for we're not making the argument that he signed a document and everybody should be upheld to that value. We signed a document to make an agreement, and we tend to use it to notify the clerk that, again, it has been resolved, and they can go ahead and cancel the hearing and issue the filing feedback, and we'll amend the assessment. So it does serve a purpose, but it's mostly procedural rather than it's certainly not going to hold up in I'm sure many courts of law or anything like that. And we certainly don't hold any ill will on a second appeal. Certainly that's Mr. Suddy's right. If he chooses to file on the amended value, he certainly can. I think it's important to know from our position is that had we had known that there would be a second complaint, we would have went to the board in the first place, and we would have led the same evidence and argument that we are leading here today, and we would have asked the board to do the same thing that we are asking them to do today, and that is consider the 3 sales that are specifically in 150 Crossbow Place. They are the most comparable sales available to the board out of all of the disclosure documents, both the complainants and the respondents. Again, the sales range, the adjusted sales range was $568,000 to $593,000. Certainly well within the range in which we're requesting at $578,000. Those same 3 sales that we've asked the board to strongly consider, again, same complex, located on the first and second floor, same square footage. Each of those units are assessed at $578,000. So, the complainant has brought forward a lot of argument with respect to equity. Well, why should his assessment be any different than the same units within his complex? We don't feel it should. Those units are assessed at $578,000, and we feel that the subjects unit should be as well. With that, Madam Chair, I think lastly, we just want to, again, really point out, really stress to the board that the subject sale at $517,000 adjusted, we feel this is not a typical sale. Again, it was a private sale, whereas the 3 sales that we've led were all MLS sales. It was a friend-to-friend sale, which is not typical. And again, the complainant has mentioned that he likely got a fairly good deal with respect to the price from his friend. So with all of the evidence and argument before you, we believe we have a strong case, as well as the complainant, and we would ask the board strongly consider our evidence and argument and change the assessment to $578,000. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Suddy, you have an opportunity for any final comments.
Yeah, just one final thing I just noticed. The respondent keeps saying the same complex, and he's only talking about comparables in 150. So I would argue that the phrase that should be used is the same building, because the complex is 150 and 170. And just one final point I forgot to mention in my first little summary. Again, the second complaint was precipitated by the compelling reason was my lower property value, and had I known at the time, it would have been brought up at the first complaint that perhaps would have then gone to hearing, and the second complaint wouldn't have been necessary. and the second $50 wouldn't have been necessary. Thank you.
Thank you very much. At this time, I just want to thank everyone for their presentations and ask the parties if you both feel that you've been heard today and that you feel you've had a fair hearing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what else I can add in addition to my documents and what I've said today, so I'm happy that I've been heard.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, we believe we've been heard. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you to Mr. Sutty. Hope everyone has a good day.
Thank you. I now declare that the hearing is closed. No further evidence or submissions will be received by the board. And within 30 days, the Municipal Government Act requires us to provide a written decision and give the clerk an additional 7 days to issue that decision. We're going to make every effort to beat those requirements and have this decision out to you as soon as we can. Thank you very much.